okay? Awesome. I have a little voice that sometimes tends to get lost, so this is super great. Thank you for having me today. It's so great to see so many faces that I haven't seen a lot of you in a long time. So I'm really happy that we were able to do this and pull this together. So thank you for coming. And I hope that for some of you, this might be a refresher. And for some of you, this might be all new stuff. So I'm really glad that we were able to come and share today. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of what we're doing and why we're doing it. For some of you, you might be familiar. Von Pope was our prior wildlife biologist, and Von has retired. He retired in October so he could do more golf and more football. His son is in his final year at college playing football, and he wanted to spend more time at those games. So he decided that that was enough and he was going to retire. So I've stepped into his shoes, and then Mackenzie Groves is our new wildlife biologist. So some of you volunteers will be seeing her out and about on Sage Hills. So make sure you stop and say hi. Oh, see, I'm pointing in the wrong direction already. Me and technology are just not buds. Oops, there we go. So many of you have heard Sage Hills. You know where Sage Hills is, but the Homewater Wildlife Preserve is not always something that's been referred to. The Homewater Wildlife Preserve, like Hannah was saying, is 960 acres, and it is smack dab in the middle of Sage Hills Trail System. Why is Chelan PUD involved in a Homewater Wildlife Preserve? What's that all about? So the Homewater District owned that property, and it used to be property that they pulled water from for the homes that were up in that area. And as many of you know, water law changes over time, and it just ended up being that you couldn't pull water from that anymore for like a municipal type system. So Chelan PUD ended up with that property in 1976. At that time, we were relicensing Rock Island Dam, and in that relicensing process, it came up that the FERC directed us to go find some more property that had riparian and wildlife habitat value. Well, we already own the Homewater property, so it just seemed like a natural fit that be incorporated into the license to satisfy our habitat requirement. So when we got that new license in 1989, it was required of Chelan PUD in Article 403 to manage the Homewater District lands as a wildlife preserve, and we were to protect it and to promote its, to protect and to preserve it as wildlife habitat value through the term of the license. So that was our requirement. And so the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, you'll hear me call it FERC, that was our thou shalt ... protect that habitat, preserve that habitat. So that's what we did. We didn't have any really strict requirements. One of them, it was written in there that we should maintain a deer fence. And I think through some conversations, it was decided that fences and deer, not always a great thing. So we elected to not maintain that deer fence because coyotes will run the deer into the fence. And so that's why you'll see relict sections of that fence there today, but we don't maintain a fence on that edge of the property because of the predation issue. Primary purpose of that 960 acres is wildlife habitat, and we have managed that as such. But many of you are here because you know and love the trails that are out on that habitat. So that's been a really interesting thing for this property. So the trail, the Chelan-Douglas Land Trust approached Chelan PUD about getting an easement for the trail in 2005. We actually permitted the trail in 2007. During that permit process, we had to go to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the FERC, and that opened up a consultation, and that's not just a little C, that's a big C with all the agencies involved. And with that, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife intervened on that particular process, and they wanted some regulations on that because of the value of it, they said, for mule deer winter habitat. So they wanted dogs on leashes, they wanted no fires, no motorized equipment. They also wanted a seasonal closure on that to protect that for the winter wildlife. And we hadn't had that before, so that was kind of a new thing. So in granting that permit to the land trust for administration of the trails, which a lot of them already existed out on the landscape, but now we had to formalize that so they could be maintained. And in doing so, we got a winter closure on that. So it's like, oh, okay, so now we have to administer winter closure. It's kind of all new to us. So we did that and closed the property from December 1st to, we opened it back up April 1. And the closure was supported by the land trust in the city and of course DFW. So here's what it looks like today. This is kind of an updated map and kind of what we did in the past and then now how things are looking in the future. So many of you know we had the original trail that was permitted. Oh yeah, I have a pointer. Was this one over here just on the far east side of the property. So there was only one authorized trail through the FERC with that consultation. And now, fast forward, looking ahead to the next 20 years, in 2017, we start conversations with the land trust and doing a little bit more formal and looking ahead to trails that are unsustainable and trails that they wanted to keep. And so we really worked on another consultation process to officially recognize some additional trails. So this Coyote Canyon that you might be familiar with, and Lightning up in here. And then there's some older Jeep trails and some really unsustainable trails that are eventually going to be phased out, and those are going to be restored to native habitat. So just kind of wanted to throw that in there. There's some ongoing work with the trails, and so you're probably going to hear a lot about that this year. For the mule deer winter use monitoring, we conducted winter monitoring after we got that closure requirement put on us by DFW. We asked for some information, like, what kind of data do you have on the winter deer use for us? And they didn't have any data for us. And we just had some winter range maps. And so we were like, well, I guess we better go get some data. So we started doing our winter mule deer counts in 2007 during that winter. We started those, we did them weekly from about mid-November through mid-April. So we would be a little bit before and a little bit after the seasonal closure. For that, ended up being about 22 surveys a winter. And we would go out there, we did these surveys from the ground. We had 2 observation stations, and we'd set up scopes and do binoculars, and we would go and just observe deer in groups, and we'd do it in grids all the way from everything that we could see on that on the view shed. So we do one station, we move to another station, and we calculated out via GIS that we could see about 56 to 58% of the property from those 2 vantage points. And we were outside of the property, right on the property line, on the east boundary of the property, and then looking up at the ridges so we could see up into the drainages about as best as we could. So we ended up gathering 17 years of wintering data, and we were able to get a good fix on the numbers of deer that were spending time in there during the prior to, during, and after the closure period, and just kind of looked at what times of the year are they using that property. So we ended up making a really great map out of all this data, and just a little heat map here. So the areas where the deer are heavily using are all these little red bubbles in here. So we did some analysis with the map and all the points and throughout that entirety of the 2007 to 2023 of where those deer are spending time. And the green is kind of our view shed area. We couldn't really see anything that was in the brown. It's just not visible to us. But everything in the green is what we could see. And so green is kind of lower numbers, maybe not statistically significant, but the red is certainly the areas that they spend time. This is really great to know because if we do any habitat plantings in the future, definitely going to be targeting those areas. And the cool thing about that is you can see the original permitted trail system going through here. So this is coming in from Day Drive, and then sandstone rocks, and then going over here that used to be the 5 trail saddle, and then this goes out to Broadview. This goes up the gut and then out to Horse Lake. But the deer are spending time away from the trail, even during the closure. So these are just looking at the maximum numbers of deer that we would see per month, so November through April. You see that March period is a really critical time. There's just a lot of deer out there in March. December also, that's another important time. There's not always necessarily a lot of snow on the ground, but you think about it, it's after the rut and the boys are tired. They need some nutrition and they need a great spot to just rest. So you see a lot of deer moving in December. The does are bringing the fawns to traditional winter range, so they all start congregating on the winter range there. And you actually see the numbers go down just a little bit in April. So this is the average elevation of deer observed per month. You see it's pretty low early on. Everybody's down as low as they can be, and then starts climbing up. February, it's really important, and you all know that go out and spray weeds. Kind of what happens in February is we get that little green up of cheatgrass sometimes that's peeking through the snow, and the deer clue into that. And they get on that right away. It's about the first green thing that they've seen since the fall, little fresh of grass. So they are on that and they start riding that green wave as soon as it starts popping up out of the ground. So that's where you really see the elevation. Whoops, I keep pushing the wrong thing. Sorry, guys. The elevations start going up as that cheatgrass comes up down in the low valley part. And then it just starts greening up higher and higher and higher up on the hill. This is just the mean monthly counts that we have out there on the landscape. Again, look at that December number. And then when everybody's starting to congregate on the wintering grounds. And then as we get our snow accumulations January and February, typically they get pushed into town a little bit more. It's a lot easier to find town in people's yards or find food in town in people's yards. And there's lots of arborvitaes planted in Wenatchee. We know they love those. And then March, when that cheatgrass comes on and we start getting that green wave, you start seeing lots of numbers as they get back on that and follow that up the hill. There's still quite a bit of deer out on the landscape in April, but they're a lot more spread out at that time. Let's see. And these are just a percent of total of all the number of deer that we'd seen throughout the study. You see that March timeframe is again really important. And so for the closure, I know it's really tempting times like this. You know, the tulip tree is blooming outside and it's super sunny, and gosh, do we really have to wait till April 1st to get out there and enjoy the trails? But you see why March is so important. There's a lot of deer that are out there on the landscape trying to forage. Conclusions of our study is mule deer use increases following the closure, of course, with the most important months being in March and April. Deer being down low early in the winter, the average number of deer used in the area increases through the winter. And so we see that February, March, time frame, just really important. And there's still a lot of deer in April, but the snow typically by then has lessened and they can spread out a little bit more across the landscape and they're not so concentrated in there. March and April, again, really important. 2007 to 2023, you know that the winters that we've had the last few years have been really super mild. And our winters have changed too. A lot of you who have grown up in this area or spent a lot of time in this area have probably really noticed that as well. That the bulk of our precipitation seems to not be coming in January anymore, that it seems like it's almost pushed a little bit later into that February, March timeframe. Early March. So and we saw that with the weird snowfall that we got a couple weeks ago. Just really interesting. But I was looking at the data between the last time we did a mule deer summit was in 2015. And then I added that 2016 to 2023 data. And it didn't change the trend line at all on these graphs that I was showing. So again, the foothills, that area up there is kind of some of the last really undeveloped and unfragmented habitat that we have for wintering mule deer. And they just have really lost a lot of their low elevation habitat. And it's really important to have that so they can survive through winter. And, think about the average loss of weight and body mass of a mule deer is 30% of their body weight throughout a winter. And I don't know that a lot of us could lose 30% of our body weight and be okay. But deer have to do that every year, and that's just during an average year. And if you can imagine if we get a hard snow, or maybe we get a snow with a rain on snow event and then it freezes, they can't access their food very well. And the higher up you go in elevation, the deeper the snow is. And it just makes it even harder for them. And then they burn more calories trying to get to their food. So having this closure, protecting this closure, and just giving them the time, the space that they need to just live, I think is really important. And we're really, really grateful for the community support behind that. It was really hard in the early years when people were aghast at the fact that we would even close that for deer. Like, don't we have enough deer? But I think with a lot of outreach and a lot of community connection and the help of Chelan-Douglas Land Trust members, just getting the word out about why it's important and why it's good stewardship to have this closure, and not just for the deer, but also to rest the trails as well. It's just really appreciative of having that support. So there's a lot of people in this room to thank for that. So thank you. Just one last thing I wanted to leave you with to share, again, to just kind of enhance why the closure. This came from the Mule Deer Summit that we did in 2015 down at Pybus Market. This slide that DFW wanted to share, we weren't able to get anybody from DFW to come help us today. They're really busy and kind of strapped right now for folks. So this slide just kind of helps demonstrate that. So the green up really brings the first opportunity to reverse that nutritional stress. So that 30% of body weight that they've lost, they've been on a decline since, October. So if all you had to eat was a bunch of sticks and not a lot of good calorie dense things for about 6 months, you'd be having a hard time too. So that cheatgrass, as much as we don't like cheatgrass, it's the first green thing that they've had to eat in a long time. So it's important that they're able to get out there and to utilize that forage. Another thing that I think is really important is that, especially with the mule deer declines across the West, is that we're forgetting that a lot of those does are pregnant and they're in their third trimester. If they don't get enough nutrition, then they can abort that fetus and they won't have young for the year. And so, any stress on them, they don't care if it's a domestic dog or a hiker or somebody motorcycle going on. It's all stress to them. And if they're not able to maintain nutrition, then their body's going to go into self-preservation mode. And, deer that are highly stressed are just not going to perform very well in the reproductive sense. And, if you think about, maybe that happening not just in Wenatchee, but also, in other areas in Yakima and, up north, and pretty soon you get large areas of impact on the deer and they're not producing very well and deer numbers will decline. So nutritional stress is really important. We try to keep an eye on the property and make sure during the closure that people aren't in there with dogs that run deer, because the deer will just run and then they will fall over dead. Try to make sure that people are not in there shed hunting. That's another thing that happens where they follow the deer and kind of push them around too much, and they'll just make them waste calories. And we try to make sure that we send security to intercept those kind of people. So just every little thing can just add up for the deer and just make it really difficult for them to maintain any calories and make it through the winter. So this March timeframe is just really important for them. And just again, thank you for getting the word out for the closure and being a good steward and sharing the news. And we've over the years have just gotten so much more compliance with that. And it's just been something that's really great. So I really appreciate that. Does anybody have any questions on our mule deer study that we did?
Have any population trends over these years you've been studying?
We don't holistically. DFW has gone out and put collars on some of these animals in the Wenatchee Mountains herd. And so they have some data, and I think there's a report that's out there available on the web on that and some of their movements. And they've done a lot of the population monitoring, but we're looking at a really small slice of the Wenatchee Mountains herd. So we're just really looking at their use areas across a small area.
Numbers pretty much the same from year to year, or have they gone up and down?
Ours has gone up and down, and I don't know that we can compare them quite to theirs. They do a lot of their counts aerial surveys, and so they're going in really large areas and in different elevational bands, and we're just looking at a really small spot. But there might be some way that you can index that kind of count. So, yeah, thanks. Okay. Well, I have Sam come on. Yeah, go ahead.
Where I actually take away the
Yeah, so in 2007, when the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife filed that intervention on the original consultation, that was for the entire license. And so any subsequent consultations, even the current one that we have, are subject to, if DFW feels like we are not managing the property consistent with our FERC requirement to protect and preserve the property as wildlife habitat, they can step in at any time and file another intervention on that. And the FERC will get to decide what we have to do. So that's why we've been really trying to work hard and get the word out and the reasons why for the closure on that. And I think the community has responded really well to that. And so it's not as big of a fear as it used to be back in the 2010s and and things like that, because our compliance has just gotten so much better, and it's very rare that we get phone calls anymore about people violating the closure. All right. Does DFW periodically reassess environments and closures? I noticed that much of the Methow wildlife area that was previously open in winter has since been closed. Is it possible that an area previously closed would reopen or vice versa? I am sure that they do. Winter closures for mule deer is more of a relative new thing across the West. Initially began, of course, like ours did, very unpopular for the public, but I think people are now really starting to understand the need for the closure as areas across the West have been developed and we're pushing mule deer up higher and higher in elevation. And people are really starting to see the need to have those winter grounds closed and managed for mule deer use in the wintertime. DFW is unlikely to go back on that. There's just more and more habitat that's lost every year for mule deer winter habitat. So I don't anticipate that they would go back and reopen things that have been previously closed. It could change as land ownership changes. That could be something, but I wouldn't anticipate that they would go and open up an area the winter that was previously reserved for mule deer winter closure. So, and especially with this area, this will have the winter closure on it probably in perpetuity.
I'm really ignorant, I don't know, are we
Yeah.
losing, are we gaining?
Yeah, we are losing, and Sam probably has a lot more insight on that. But mule deer populations across the West are tanking, and the kind of a recent addition to Washington State is we have the chronic wasting disease is starting to march its way over, and so even in the eastern portion of Washington State, where that hasn't been a concern, it is now a concern, and so. I think DFW is going to take probably a harder line on winter closures and protecting areas of mule deer habitat, and even things that we've done in the past, like putting up feeding stations or guzzlers, enhancing maybe mineral licks and things for deer. We're not doing those things anymore because we don't want to concentrate them in one unnatural area. Mule deer are facing a lot of pressure from a variety of different things. So it's development, it's disease, it's corridors being cut off, there's fences, there's just an assault by many different things. And we think of, oh gosh, deer everywhere, deer are fine. They're really starting to show some bad trends. All right, passing it over to you.
Hey, everybody. And just as the ship didn't leave the station, if you have a question for Kelly after my portion, I'm sure we can get her back up here and collaboratively answer some questions. Or if you're thinking on one and need a second to articulate it, we'll get Kelly back up here at the end. Again, my name is Sam Jordan. I'm the Stewardship Director for the Land Trust. And with my portion of the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about how special we are and then kind of take y'all through some of the points that Kelly made, but a little deeper dive from the perspective of the mule deer. What's it like to survive on a Wenatchee Hill slope through the winter, and a little bit drawing from previous research that I've done. So just to kind of open with how special we are, I just want to acknowledge the hard work of the folks in the room to conserve these properties and to put this seasonal closure in place. I think that we get pretty good dang compliance. And that's a pat on the back for all of y'all that have had hard conversations or taken an unpopular stance. Our community does remarkably well with this seasonal closure. And that's incredibly powerful. As kind of the astute question we had at the end, is there a limit to which we would get in trouble with this closure if we don't get enough compliance? The answer is yeah, there's a limit there. And so maintaining this closure into the future is in everyone's mutual interest. And just kind of understanding the why is a really powerful tool for all of us, for our friends, empowering each of you to be an ambassador for the land trust and just sort of understand why we have this closure. So I know the foothills don't exactly look like this right now, but every winter, predictably, at this far of a latitude, it gets cold and it's kind of hard to survive as a critter. These are the protected lands around town. Everyone's probably got their own favorite spot on this map you're looking at. Wenatchee North is actually pointing to the right, and we talk about our closures as north of 5th Street. So you kind of have to turn your head to think about north. But I just want to draw your attention to a couple of things. This is the biggest blob of protected habitat in the area, right? So if you're going to close an area, go big. And it's really important because of these conserved lands that are contiguous with the home water preserve, that it's all kind of a unified front. We have multiple landowners in there. I'm happy to answer questions about that, but all of us multiple landowners work together. That's one of the layers of why we're special, is not only do we have a seasonal closure and it's pretty good compliance, but it's a very big tent that we've pitched to get this done. And then there's plenty of fun places to go walk in the wintertime, right? I mean, if y'all haven't enjoyed a winter morning on Castle Rock or up Saddle Rock, you know that there's really great opportunities still. And it's not that humans, and I'll get into this a lot, the science of recreation later in this talk, it's not that we don't have an impact here, but if you'll just look at the scale of the trail system, it's a little bit more bounded, right? Dry Gulch has a winter closure. I should have put that on the map, but our trail systems around Saddle Rock and Castle Rock are a little bit more bounded, whereas if you get into the northern trail system, it's just a bit more expansive. And critically, that's where the winter mule deer spend their time. So this is kind of what you think about with winter mule deer. They're marching across the mountainside. They're making their journey. They're congregating. But really, this is kind of the scene. This is what they spend a lot of their time doing. They're actually ruminating. So as Kelly alluded to, they're eating sticks, extremely low nutritional quality. And so they have to depend on that engine in their gut to make that into energy available to them. And it's just really important that they get left alone and they complete that digestion cycle. When the snow gets heavy enough, they'll even do something called yarding, which basically means they've got a little spot like this that they like. And then one will walk through and kind of carve a path in the snow. And then the next year is pretty good about following that path and cutting the corner as far as making a new skin track, if you follow me there, of how much energy do I have to use in a daily basis just to do what I need to do. So for my talk, I want to kind of draw from this publication that I led at my previous job. This is freely available on the internet. If anybody's interested, just find my email. I'll send it to you directly, or you can look it up. But what we did was a big science synthesis on everything that we know about what non-motorized recreation, critically non-motorized, no motorcycles or trucks, does to ungulates. And so mule deer were a part of that study. What is really going on when you see mule deer out on the landscape? So Kelly did a great job of kind of walking through this. There's their body condition or weight over the winter. What we're looking at are a couple of squiggly lines, and I'll just try to narrate it for the folks on Zoom, because I know you can't see my pointer that well, but we have two squiggly lines. That's the weight of one deer through the winter season. So as we go from left to right, we're kind of going out of the winter and into the summer, and weight is on the y-axis. So deer number one starts heavy, loses 30% of her body weight, and stays just north of this reproductive weight threshold. Essentially, her body needs to stay in good enough condition that she can carry that calf. And then deer number 2 starts a little lighter, dips below the reproductive threshold, but doesn't quite pass the survival threshold. Essentially, if I was giving you rations, like limiting your calories, and I made you run up Castle Rock every day, you'd probably get a little skinny. If anybody's interested in an extreme weight loss program, I might recommend the winter boot camp. But why of the winter closure really matters in this gap right here. And that my animation was a little off. But why would a mama deer be heavier or lighter starting the winter? And I'll get into some more data of this. But if the deer has been disturbed, is the word we use, but made to run around enough that she lost too much weight, then she won't carry that fawn all the way through. It's really that simple. We are helping them survive in what is literally a life or death situation every winter, to be able to keep the population growing, right? This is a really important management lever that we have to pull. So, beyond the next crop of deer, the baby deer, we also have the young ones to think about too, as they survive what can be really harsh winter conditions here in the North Cascades. So this is another set of data that I'll just kind of walk us through, that looks at fawns on the top panel and mama deer or does on the bottom. How many of them die is on the y-axis, that's percent mortality. And then on the x-axis is how far they run. So this is just a simulation. It was a bioenergetics model. It's not actually real world data, but it just says a thought exercise. That's what we're doing here. What happens in a mild winter versus a severe winter? So mild are the ones towards the bottom, severes are towards the top. How far are you making the deer run? The big take home from this figure is that the further a deer is forced to flee, that's up 500 there, that's 500 meters, the more likely it is to die. And Kelly said it, like they'll run till death. And beyond just like kind of a dramatic cartoon, like falling over, you've got just that loss of fat reserves, which they are just completely dependent on to survive a harsh winter. And then the y-axes are not scaled. In a severe winter, many of the babies will die anyway. And so if we're making them run by disturbing them as recreators, which I promise I'll still get to in a little bit, then we're sort of hedging our bets in the wrong direction. We're causing them distress. We're making them more likely to perish. Down here for the does, the grown-ups, if they're disturbed once a week and made to run, like they're going to do okay. But why have a winter closure? Well, the more you make them run, the further they have to run, the more likely they are to die. So again, the take home is running has a cost. If everybody went out there and ran up Castle Rock before coming to this presentation, I promise you there would be fewer bags of potato chips left on the table because we would have all had a big caloric energetic output and would be desperate. Our bodies would be telling us to replace that. So even when you go out and you're hiking or you're riding your bike and you see the deer at a distance on a sight line like this, what might happen? So this is a big figure. Don't worry, you don't have to read all the words on it. You can kind of already intuit what happens. You've got yourself up there, and what does the presence of a recreator, a presence of a human do? What can it do to the deer? You can make them stressed. You can objectively measure how much stress cortisol they have in their system, stress hormones. They can spend less time chewing. It's so chewy to eat all those sticks that they don't hear well. And so if you'll pay close attention, you'll see deer stop chewing just to listen more. There's only so many hours in a day to chew. And so that ends up having a cost. They can run, they can flee, just walking down the right side here, panel E. That's obviously what we've been talking about quite a bit. They can change what time of day they're available, which can interact with predators and stuff, or they can just leave the area. If it's a nice place for them to hang out, like the home water, but too many people are there, they might just say, this is too stressful, I'm not going to go. And then a couple other panels on the other thing is just responding to habitat changes, which is like more loss or conversion from fire or development or whatever. And then down here at the bottom, the cumulative effects really matter. I think a critical thing to remember is, oh, I'm not a hunter. I don't shoot deer, so I'm not taking part in the population crash, right? Well, if you're causing a doe not to carry her fawn to term, that's one fewer deer in the population. And if so, you scale that up to recreators from our whole Wenatchee foothills area and recreator community, that can add up to a population level effect. So even this is a challenge for everybody as you go out and recreate after the closure is lifted, as I know you all do so respectfully. Pay attention to the deer. They are paying attention to you, and you can learn a lot just from the subtleties of their behavior. Because our foothills trails are busy. I mean, they are really, really busy sometimes. And even if this is you, or rather, this is your thing. Hey, I'm just one person on a mountain bike. I go out super early. It's not me. Like, what impact do I have? Well, the deer do acclimate and use different habitat types during the summer season. That's how we can get recreation and conservation to coexist. But in those windows, like we've talked about at length, even just one person can sort of have a really big ripple effect. I know you're not pulling the trigger on a rifle, but you are changing the behavior, the nutritional input, and potentially the demographics of our deer population. And if you're this fellow, you're probably kind of paying attention to where your front tires going so you don't go over the handlebars, and you'll probably miss much more than you're aware of when you're out there. The deer have much better senses than we do. They are completely tuned in to us, even if we're not tuned into them. So that is a kind of a one-sided relationship, even though a recreator might say, I'm just doing my thing, I'm leave no trace, I'm not causing an impact. Well, you probably don't even see half of the critters that see you. So I'll close with one of the best reasons why we have this winter closure, and Kelly nailed it in kind of her closing, is that half of the trails up there look like this right now anyway. And if we had winter use on it, it is just not snowed in enough to be a ski area, and it's not well trained enough that the trails could handle it. And we would just have big mud pits instead of our single track. And we struggle with this even during the open season of deep tires sinking in and boot prints sinking in. So it's like a huge, huge help on the land trust side that we don't have winter use just to maintain a higher quality set of trails. Our soil type and moisture really interact so that it's a great time to just let Horse Lake be, right? And then it'll be there for us once the closure opens up. So with that, I really thank everybody for respecting our trail closure. I hope that you have a couple things to put in your back pocket as to the why of it. And I would also encourage folks to be kind. If you come across somebody that is violating the closure, try to offer some connection with them as to the why we do it. And as this amazing partnership shows, compliance really opens up a lot more doors for our community than being antagonistic about it. So we've got an open door. If anybody's really interested in the topic beyond today's talk, we'd always be happy to host you in our office down there in downtown Wenatchee, or even have a chat with Kelly sometime. I think we've had some good questions about mule deer populations region-wide. As Susan always says, Wenatchee is just sort of emblematic of the American West in so many ways, and so we're not, we have many of the same issues that you hear about in the headlines, and so if you're ever interested in a particular issue, the Land Trust is a great place to engage with this. Thanks for your time. And not to immediately scare folks off, but if you do have a question, we're going to have you use the microphone so the folks on Zoom can hear you.
Are predators much more likely to hunt deer because they are on reserves?
There's a really fascinating work about the way that recreators and predators and ungulates all interact. It's called the landscape of fear. And essentially that if the deer can get a little bit more comfortable being around a trail, a wolf is much less likely to be comfortable next to a trail than a deer is. And so it's called like a halo effect. And so sometimes having trails means that it's like makes it a little bit better habitat for ungulates. But kind of that's in that report I mentioned. If you're interested in that information, mostly if you have a deer that is weak and sick and damaged and sad because it's been chased around by recreators, it's much more likely to fall to predation.
This is a really more of a kind of somewhat personal question in that we've lived here for 40 years plus, and we really notice a lot more deer in town. We live on the west side, on the east side of Western. In the 1980s and early 1990s, we would never have seen deer sign in our yard. And now we do. We see them on our street. So, and also Wenatchee Valley College campus. So, can you enlighten us about this?
That's a great question. It's a super fun topic, and I'm just hovering to try to not get feedback. The big umbrella phrase is like rapid evolution. And another way of saying it is wildlife have incredible deep wisdom, right? And so they know, they get feedback, they learn, they adapt, and are very plastic in many ways. And so you tend to see like critters, wildlife, much more broad than deer, having smaller body sizes on average and having sometimes shorter reproduction cycles and moving into cities. Cities are bigger than they ever have been in human history. And so there's resources here, there's protection from predators. And what we've seen is like you can think about it as a cultural shift as well as a biological shift of a mother deer making a calculated risk of, I'm hungry, I'm a little bit scared, but this Wenatchee Valley campus has got a lot of grass on it. Like I might carry stress guiding my young to this place, but the risk is worth it. And then they get that feedback of they're not chased off or shot at on the college campus. And so they learn, and their young learn that from the previous generation. And so there's been like a time delay, like over your lifetime, right? How many generations of deer is that? And it does take a little bit of generational turnover, and they learn new systems. Simultaneously, there are more homes on ridgetops around the valley than we've ever had in the past, and that is habitat fragmentation and conversion as well that sort of takes away what was previous habitat. Why we support the reserves around town so much.
I have a follow-up to that question. Can that explain too why we're seeing deer in town in the summer? Like they never move up. Same thing?
I would assume so. That'd be a great question for like a dyed-in-the-wool wildlife biologist. I think that you can also have kind of splits in populations, and with the town deer phenomena, they may not migrate. They may not spend any time on the winter range, and they're just living in town. We have had a cultural shift probably when most of us were young folks. Like it would have been a little easier for somebody to kind of quietly take a deer in their backyard, with a rifle or archery, and backyards were a little bigger. The edge of town was a little closer in. And so that more dogs off leash, like I remember growing up, I get chased by dogs all the time riding a bike around. And now like code has caught up and fences have caught up, and it's just there's less friction sometimes for staying in place. And all that adds up, and you have a resident deer population. I don't know, I saw somebody with the Salida, Colorado shirt on, used to live there. There's deer in town 365 days a year. People will have fawns in their front yard. Like that's a place where probably a combination of predators and other things have really created this species strategy shift to be more urban. Yes.
Yeah, I've noticed that I assume it's the game department will put collars on deer and fly around with helicopters. Just how much of a stress is that on the deer, and is there I guess, a risk benefit ratio in that calculation?
That's a great question. If you were chased with a helicopter, shot with a net gun, put a blindfold on, tackled, and then had a collar permanently attached, you probably would remember it. If not, a little blacking out from the trauma of it. But yes, that's a snarky way of saying it is stressful on the individuals, but it is one of the most useful tools that we have. Our methods have really changed over time. The collars get lighter and fancier. They fall off at predictable ways. And so that is a calculated risk, that's for sure. And the state game departments are very stringent with who they offer that opportunity to, recognizing that can be destructive and critters do perish from being tagged like that. But they'll glue tags to the back of snails these days. I mean, the technology is really amazing and they're getting smaller. And I think it's always important to ask is it worth it, kind of question for conservation. We shouldn't try to conserve a species into extinction. And yet it is like kind of the gold standard for where they are and how often they're spending time for our understanding of their biology. So the game department is who manages those, and there's fascinating work out there about it. Just a quick time check. Are we doing all right on time? Maybe. Sounds good.
Along his lines with the helicopter, are drones a problem? And does the Land Trust use drones to help with that? Because drones can be a problem.
Yeah, that's a good question. In general, drones are a problem when the deer can perceive them, right? Especially in critical windows. So like the fawning season or the rut. But it's typically there's the sound decay function of distance. It's the inverse squared law. So the further that drone is from you, the less likely you are to hear it. And of course, they're sort of hard to observe. So I wouldn't rank the drone itself as much of an issue. It's really the people that are standing there with their controller and pulled up in a truck and like kind of focused on their thing that I would think would have a bigger footprint. The Land Trust doesn't own any drones, but it's certainly a tool in the conservation toolkit. We use it to track invasive species or do site assessments where we didn't have time to walk to. Lots and lots of really cool stuff is coming out of the drone world, and yet we got to kind of hold that separate. There's conservation tools on drones, and then there's like just flying them for fun, and I see those as kind of separate. And then Wally's got our last question: is there a difference between the impact of on and off leash dogs on the deer? That you would be amazed at how really understudied this phenomena is, but there's some kind of seminal work out of the Boulder, Colorado area that specifically looked at the on-leash, off-leash impacts of dogs. And generally, it's important for everybody to remember a deer sees a dog as a predator. They don't know that they're descendants of wolves, they're cousins of wolves. In the deer's mind, it could be a wolf. And so I'm going to treat that accordingly. Of course, there's habituation that we didn't really talk about here. But if a dog is going to be running after the deer and leaving the trail corridor, that's a completely different ballpark of impact than the dog that stays adjacent to their owner and under physical control. And so a leash dog that stays on the trail does have a smaller impact than the dog that's allowed to run around. Of course, it's a constant challenge in our foothills, but that synthesis I talked about references that study. And as I kind of opened with, it's really not very well studied. So much of the science of recreation is really just a budding field, and we have a lot more to understand. I thank everybody for your attention and for coming to this talk on your lunch hour. We'd be happy to hang out and answer questions after.